When a powerful CEO discovers his new wife forcing his 7-year-old daughter into servitude, he unleashes a storm that will shake Manhattan's elite. But sometimes the price of justice is higher than anyone imagined. What happens when a father's love meets a stepmother's greed? Stay with us to discover how one man's decision changed everything. Before this story begins, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The marble floors of the Riverside Drive mansion gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 32 years old, Marcus Wellington had built an empire from nothing, his technology company now worth $3 billion. But all his success meant nothing compared to the small blonde girl who was his entire world. 7-year-old Aria Wellington sat cross-legged on the Persian rug in the living room, her bright blue eyes focused intently on the puzzle pieces scattered before her. Her golden hair caught the light as she worked, completely absorbed in creating a picture of a butterfly garden. She wore a simple pink dress that had seen better days, though Marcus had bought her a closet full of designer clothes just months ago. The mansion itself was a testament to Marcus's success. 15,000 square feet of luxury overlooking the Hudson River. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Priceless artwork adorned the walls, and every piece of furniture had been carefully selected by interior designers who charged more per hour than most people made in a month. Yet despite all this opulence, the house felt cold and empty without Sarah's warm presence. "Daddy will be home soon," Aria whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed since her mother's death 2 years earlier. The cancer had taken Sarah Wellington quickly, leaving Marcus devastated and struggling to balance his demanding career with raising his daughter alone. Those first months had been a blur of nannies, housekeepers, and well-meaning relatives who all fell short of filling the void Sarah had left behind. At only 30, Marcus had found himself a widower trying to balance building an empire with raising a grieving 5-year-old daughter. Marcus had thrown himself into work during those dark days, building his company into an even bigger empire as a way to cope with his grief. Wellington Industries had expanded into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable energy technologies. He told himself he was securing Aria's future, but the truth was that work was the only place where the pain didn't follow him. That's when Celeste Hartwell had entered their lives like a ray of sunshine, or so it had seemed. At 25, the stunning blonde with emerald eyes and a smile that could light up a room had captured the attention of the 30-year-old widower at a charity gala for childhood cancer research. The 7-year age difference seemed insignificant compared to their apparent connection over shared loss. She was sophisticated, charming, and most importantly, wonderful with Aria. Or at least that's what Marcus believed. Celeste had approached him that night with tears in her eyes after his speech about Sarah's battle with cancer. She claimed to be a freelance event coordinator who had lost her own mother to the same disease. Her story was heartbreaking, growing up poor in rural Ohio, watching her mother work multiple jobs to pay for treatments that ultimately failed, and her own struggle to build a career in New York's competitive social scene. "I understand your pain," she had whispered that night, her hand gently touching his arm. "Loss changes us in ways we never expected." The sound of heels clicking against marble announced Celeste's approach. She appeared in the doorway wearing a flowing red dress that complemented her perfectly styled hair. Her beauty was undeniable, the kind that stopped traffic and made photographers beg for just one shot. But there was something cold in her eyes that never quite matched her smile, something Marcus had been too blinded by grief and loneliness to notice. "Aria, darling," Celeste said, her voice honey-sweet, but with an edge that made the little girl look up nervously. "I need you to clean up this mess immediately. We can't have puzzles scattered everywhere when your father comes home." Aria began gathering the pieces carefully, her small fingers working to sort them back into the box. "But I'm almost finished, Celeste. Can I please finish it first? I've been working on it all afternoon. What did I tell you about calling me that?" Celeste's voice sharpened like a blade. "It's mother now, and no, you cannot finish it. Your father works very hard to provide this beautiful home, and the least you can do is keep it tidy. Do you see all these expensive things around you? The artwork, the furniture, the clothes on your back? None of this would exist without your father's hard work. The little girl's shoulders sagged, but she nodded obediently. Ever since Marcus had married Celeste 3 months ago, things had changed dramatically in the Wellington household. The staff had been dismissed one by one, always for minor infractions that somehow only Celeste witnessed. First, it was the night security guard who allegedly fell asleep on duty. Then the day chef who supposedly used expired ingredients. The gardener who left tools lying around. The personal assistant who was allegedly gossiping about the family. Now only Maria, the elderly housekeeper who had been with the family for years, remained. Maria Gonzalez was a 60-year-old woman from El Salvador who had worked for the Wellingtons since before Aria was born. She had helped Sarah through her pregnancy, had been there for Aria's first steps, first words, first day of school. Marcus kept her on despite Celeste's subtle suggestions that they needed younger, more efficient staff, because he knew how much Aria loved her. As Aria packed away her puzzle, Celeste watched with satisfaction. The child was learning her place, just as she should. Marcus was brilliant in business but surprisingly naive when it came to people, especially beautiful women who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He had no idea that Celeste had spent months researching him before that charity gala, learning everything about his habits, his vulnerabilities, his deepest fears and desires. "When you're done with that, I need you to water the plants in the conservatory," Celeste continued, settling onto the white leather sofa with practiced grace. "And make sure you don't spill water on the furniture like last time. Those chairs cost more than most people's cars." Aria nodded again, her small hands working quickly to put the puzzle pieces back in their box. She had learned not to argue with Celeste when they were alone. The woman her father had married was very different when Marcus wasn't around, and Aria was smart enough, too smart for her own good, really, to understand that telling her father would only cause problems. The conservatory was Aria's favorite room in the house, a glass-enclosed paradise filled with exotic plants that her mother had loved. Sarah had spent hours in there, teaching Aria about different flowers and their meanings, showing her how to care for the delicate orchids and vibrant tropical plants. Now it felt like a prison where Celeste sent her to do chores that seemed designed more to keep her busy and out of the way than to actually accomplish anything useful. The phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the afternoon silence. Celeste answered with her practiced, cheerful tone, the one that sounded like honey and sunshine. "Wellington residence, this is Mrs. Wellington speaking." "Celeste, it's Marcus. I'm going to be about an hour late tonight. The Singapore acquisition is requiring more attention than expected, and I need to review the final contracts before tomorrow's board meeting." "Of course, darling. Don't worry about us. Aria and I will have a lovely evening together. Won't we, sweetheart?" She looked at Aria with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised consequences if the wrong answer was given. "That's wonderful. I know how much it means to Aria to have you there. Give her my love, and tell her I'll read her a story when I get home, no matter how late it is. Maybe we can finish that chapter of Charlotte's Web we started last weekend. I'll be sure to tell her. I love you too, Marcus. Drive safely." As Celeste hung up, her expression immediately changed. The warm smile disappeared like snow in summer, replaced by cold calculation. An extra hour meant more time to ensure Aria understood exactly how things worked in this house now. It meant more time to establish the proper hierarchy, to make sure the child knew her place in the new order of things. "Change of plans, little one," Celeste said, rising gracefully from the sofa like a predator uncoiling. "Your father is going to be late, which means we have plenty of time for your chores. First, I want you to dust the entire library, every single book, every shelf, every surface. Then you'll need to organize my jewelry collection by color and value, and after that you can start on the conservatory plants." Aria's eyes widened. Those chores would take hours, and she hadn't even had lunch yet. Her stomach had been growling for the past hour, but she had learned not to complain about hunger around Celeste. "But Celeste, Mother, I'm really hungry. Could I please have something to eat first, just a sandwich or some crackers?" "Hungry children eat what they're given when they're given it," Celeste replied coolly, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And children who don't finish their chores don't eat at all. Now go get the step stool from the kitchen and start with the library. I want to see those books sparkle." As Aria hurried away, her little legs carrying her as quickly as possible toward the kitchen. Celeste smiled to herself. The child was learning respect, and soon enough, she would be nothing more than a well-behaved shadow in the background of Celeste's new life. A life of luxury, privilege, and access to a fortune that would set her up for decades to come. What Celeste didn't know was that Marcus's meeting in Singapore had been conducted via video conference and had ended 20 minutes early. The contracts were already signed, the deal was done, and he was already in the elevator of their building, eager to surprise his daughter and wife. He had stopped at FAO Schwartz on the way home to pick up a new set of watercolor paints that Arya had been admiring in their window display. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the penthouse level, and Marcus stepped out, his briefcase in one hand and the cheerfully wrapped gift in the other. He was thinking about Arya's reaction when she saw the new art supplies, how her face would light up with joy, how she would immediately want to start painting something for him to hang in his office. As he quietly opened the front door with his key, planning to surprise them both with his early arrival, he heard voices coming from the direction of the library. Celeste's voice was carrying clearly through the mansion's open floor plan, but the tone was nothing like the warm, nurturing voice she used when he was around. What he heard next would shatter everything he thought he knew about his perfect new marriage and change the course of all their lives forever. Marcus froze in the marble-floored entryway, his briefcase still in his hand, and the gift bag for Arya clutched in the other, as Celeste's voice carried clearly through the mansion's open floor plan. The tone was nothing like the warm, nurturing voice she used when he was around. This voice was sharp, cold, and filled with a cruelty that made his blood run cold. "I said dust every book, Arya. That means you take each one off the shelf, dust it properly with the cloth, and put it back exactly where it belongs. And stop sniffling. It's very unattractive and annoying." Through the archway that led to the library, Marcus could see his 7-year-old daughter standing on a step stool, struggling to reach the higher shelves that contained his collection of first-edition novels and business texts. Her small arms were stretched above her head, and even from a distance he could see that she was trembling with exhaustion. The step stool she was using was too tall for her, designed for adults, and she had to stretch dangerously to reach the books. The library itself was massive, with floor-to-ceiling shelves that contained over 3,000 books. It would take an adult several hours to dust every single volume properly. For a 7-year-old child, it was an impossible task designed to break her spirit. "Please, my arms hurt," Arya said quietly, her voice thick with unshed tears and exhaustion. "And I'm really, really hungry. Could I please have just a small snack? Maybe some crackers or an apple?" Marcus's blood ran cold as he heard the desperation in his daughter's voice. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and from what he could tell, Arya hadn't eaten since breakfast. He started to move forward, his protective instincts screaming at him to intervene immediately, but Celeste's response stopped him in his tracks. "Hurt? You think your arms hurt?" Celeste laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. It was cruel and mocking. "Let me tell you about Hurt, you ungrateful little girl. Hurt is working 3 jobs to pay for community college while spoiled little princesses like you are handed everything on a silver platter. Hurt is watching your mother die because you can't afford decent health care. Hurt is sleeping in your car because you can't make rent. You want to know what real hurt feels like?" Marcus watched in horror as Celeste stood up from the leather reading chair, where she had been supervising Arya's forced labor, and walked over to where his daughter was still reaching for a book on a high shelf. The heels of her expensive shoes clicked ominously against the hardwood floor, and there was something predatory in her movements. Without warning, she grabbed Arya's arm and yanked her down from the step stool with such force that the little girl nearly fell. Arya cried out in pain and fear, her small body trembling as she looked up at the woman who was supposed to be caring for her. "Your precious daddy isn't here to protect you now," Celeste hissed, her mask completely slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating person beneath. "So let me explain how things really work in this house from now on. You are going to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, how I tell you, or things will get much worse for you. Do you understand me?" Arya nodded frantically, tears now streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. I'll be good, I promise." "Good. Now, since you're so concerned about your arms hurting, let's give them a real workout. You're going to clean every single window in this house, inside and outside. That's 43 windows total, and you're going to do it without the cleaning services equipment. You'll use a bucket, some rags, and this step stool, and you won't stop until every window sparkles like crystal. Marcus felt something break inside his chest as he watched his daughter's shoulders shake with silent sobs. This was the woman he had trusted with the most precious thing in his world. This was the woman he had brought into their home, into their family, into his bed. This was the woman who had sworn to love and protect Arya as if she were her own daughter. But the windows are so high, Arya whispered, her voice barely audible. What if I fall? What if I get hurt? Then you'd better be careful, hadn't you? Celeste's voice was ice cold, without a trace of concern for the child's safety. And if you even think about telling your father about our little conversations, I'll make sure you spend every day for the rest of your childhood doing chores until your hands bleed. He'll never believe you anyway. After all, who would believe that someone as beautiful and charming as me could be anything but wonderful? I'm an actress, little girl. I've been playing roles my whole life, and your father believes every single performance. Marcus felt his hands beginning to shake with rage. Every protective instinct he possessed was screaming at him to burst into that room and confront Celeste immediately. But he forced himself to remain still, to keep listening, because he needed evidence. He needed proof of what she was doing to his daughter. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and began recording, as Celeste continued her verbal and emotional assault on Arya. In fact, let's practice right now, Celeste continued, circling around Arya like a predator stalking wounded prey. When your father comes home tonight, you're going to smile and tell him what a wonderful day we had together. You're going to say that I helped you with your homework, that we played educational games, that we had meaningful conversations about your mother's memory, and that you love having me as your new mother. Can you do that for me, Arya? Yes, ma'am, Arya whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her quiet crying. I can't hear you. Speak up. Yes, ma'am, Arya said louder, her small body rigid with fear and exhaustion. Excellent. Because if you say even one word to your father about what really happens when he's not here, tomorrow you'll be scrubbing every bathroom in this house with a toothbrush. Your toothbrush. And then you'll clean the kitchen floor with the same toothbrush. And if you cry or complain, you'll do it again the next day and the day after that. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone steady. But he managed to capture several more minutes of Celeste's abuse before he heard footsteps approaching the front door. Maria, the housekeeper, was returning from her weekly grocery shopping trip to the market. Quickly and quietly, Marcus slipped back outside into the hallway and waited for Maria to enter the apartment. He gave her a few minutes to put away the groceries and get settled before making his official entrance, this time making sure to close the door loudly enough to announce his presence to everyone in the house. Hello, I'm home, he called out, his voice carefully controlled despite the fury burning in his chest like molten lava. Immediately, he heard Celeste's voice transform back into the warm, loving tone she always used around him. It was like watching a master actress slip into character, and the speed of the transformation made him feel physically sick. Marcus, you're early, darling. What a wonderful surprise, she called back. She appeared in the foyer within seconds, wearing her perfect smile and looking every inch the devoted stepmother. Her red dress was still immaculate, her hair still perfectly styled, and there was no trace of the cruel woman he had just witnessed tormenting his daughter. Behind her, Arya emerged from the library, and Marcus's heart broke at the sight of his daughter's red-rimmed eyes, her pale complexion, and the way she seemed to shrink in on herself when Celeste was near. How was your day, sweetheart? Marcus asked, kneeling down to Arya's level. He searched her face, seeing the fear and exhaustion she was trying so hard to hide. There were dust smudges on her pink dress, her hair was disheveled from reaching up to high shelves, and her small hands were already showing signs of dryness from handling cleaning supplies. Arya glanced quickly at Celeste, who nodded almost imperceptibly before answering. It was good, Daddy. Mother, she helped me with my reading, and we played some educational games, and we talked about Mommy. The lie came out in a rush, and Marcus could see how much it cost his daughter to say those words. Every syllable seemed to cause her physical pain, and he noticed how she kept her eyes focused on the floor rather than meeting his gaze. "That sounds wonderful. I'm so glad you two are getting along so well." He looked up at Celeste, and for just a moment, allowed a hint of steel to enter his voice. "We need to talk later, darling. About a few things that came up at work today." Something flickered in Celeste's eyes, a moment of uncertainty, perhaps even fear, but her smile never wavered. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll ask Maria to prepare dinner while we chat. I was thinking of making your favorite, that salmon dish with the lemon herb sauce." As they moved toward the dining room, Marcus kept his arm around Arya's shoulders, feeling how tense and small she seemed under his touch. His mind was already working, already planning. Celeste thought she had been clever, manipulating and abusing his daughter while he was at work, using his love and trust against him. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated exactly how far a father would go to protect his child. And Marcus Wellington was about to show her that when it came to his daughter's safety and well-being, there were absolutely no limits to what he would do. Dinner that evening was a carefully orchestrated performance that made Marcus's stomach turn with revulsion. Celeste played the perfect stepmother with the skill of a seasoned Broadway actress, cutting Arya's food into perfectly bite-sized pieces, asking detailed questions about her day at school, and making gentle, caring suggestions about bedtime routines and weekend activities. To any outside observer, she would have appeared to be a loving, attentive mother figure who had seamlessly integrated into the Wellington family. But Marcus now saw through every gesture, every smile, every carefully chosen word. He watched as Arya picked at her food like a bird, her appetite clearly affected by the stress and trauma of the day. He noticed how his daughter kept glancing nervously at Celeste, as if waiting for some invisible signal or dreading the next instruction. Most tellingly, he saw how Arya flinched almost imperceptibly whenever Celeste reached toward her, even for seemingly innocent gestures like passing the salt or wiping a crumb from her cheek. The dining room, with its mahogany table that could seat 12 and its crystal chandelier that had cost more than most people's annual salaries, felt like a stage set for this grotesque performance. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, that they were surrounded by luxury while his daughter was being emotionally tortured. "Arya seems tired tonight," Marcus observed, his tone carefully casual but his eyes alert to every nuance of the interaction between his daughter and wife. "Oh, we had such a busy day," Celeste replied smoothly, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from Arya's face with a tenderness that was completely fabricated. The little girl flinched almost imperceptibly at the touch, a reaction so subtle that someone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it entirely. But Marcus saw it, and it made his hands tighten into fists under the table. "We've been spring cleaning the library together, haven't we, sweetheart? Arya has been such a wonderful helper." "Yes, ma'am," Arya whispered, not looking up from her plate where she was methodically separating her vegetables into tiny piles. "She's been such a good helper," Celeste continued, her voice dripping with false affection that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Though I think all that dusting and organizing has worn her out. Perhaps an early bedtime would be best tonight. What do you think, Marcus? She needs her rest for school tomorrow." Marcus forced himself to nod agreeably, playing along with the charade while his mind raced with plans for what came next. "That sounds like a good idea. Arya, why don't you go get ready for bed? Brush your teeth, put on your pajamas, and I'll be up in a few minutes to read you that story I promised. We can finally finish that chapter of Charlotte's Web we started last weekend." Relief flooded Arya's face so obviously that Marcus wondered how he had been so blind before. How long had this been going on? How many days had his daughter suffered while he worked late at the office, attended board meetings, traveled for business, trusting that she was safe and loved in her own home? How many nights had she gone to bed hungry or exhausted from forced labor, while he thought she was being cared for by a loving stepmother? As Arya hurried upstairs, practically running to escape Celeste's presence, Marcus turned his attention back to his wife, who was delicately sipping her wine and looking the picture of domestic contentment. She had changed for dinner into an elegant black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, and her makeup was flawless despite having spent the day supposedly spring cleaning with a 7-year-old. "You know," he said conversationally, cutting into his salmon with more force than necessary, I was thinking we should plan a family vacation. Maybe somewhere tropical? Aria has never been to the Caribbean, and I think a change of scenery would do us all good. Celeste's eyes lit up with genuine excitement for the first time all evening. That sounds absolutely wonderful, darling. I was just telling my sister about this amazing resort in St. Bart's that I saw featured in Architectural Digest. Private villas with infinity pools, world-class spa, Michelin-starred restaurant, helicopter transfers. It would be absolutely perfect for us. I'm sure it would, Marcus replied, making a mental note to have his lawyers examine their prenuptial agreement with a fine-tooth comb first thing in the morning. Though I was thinking more about what Aria would enjoy. Maybe Disney World, or perhaps a dude ranch where she could learn to ride horses. She's always loved animals. A flicker of annoyance crossed Celeste's perfectly composed features before she caught herself and rearranged her expression back into one of agreeable sweetness. Of course, whatever would make Aria happy. You're such a devoted father, Marcus. It's one of the things I love most about you. The word love coming from her lips made him feel physically sick, especially knowing what he had witnessed earlier. But Marcus managed to smile and reach across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm going to go say goodnight to Aria. Why don't you relax here? I'll have Maria bring you some coffee and maybe that tiramisu you like so much. That sounds lovely, Celeste purred, clearly pleased to have the evening to herself. Take your time with Aria. I know how much these bedtime stories mean to both of you. Upstairs, Marcus found his daughter already in her pajamas, a soft pink set with cartoon butterflies that Sarah had bought for her just weeks before her death. Aria was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands, which Marcus now noticed were rougher than they should be for a 7-year-old. There were small cuts and calluses that spoke of cleaning supplies and repetitive manual labor. The bedroom itself was a little girl's dream, painted in soft pastels with a canopy bed, built-in bookcases filled with fairy tales and children's classics, and a window seat that looked out over the Hudson River. But tonight, it felt like a refuge, a safe haven from the nightmare that the rest of the house had become. Hey, little star, he said softly, using the nickname he'd given her when she was a baby, inspired by the way her eyes seemed to sparkle like starlight. How are you really feeling? Aria looked up at him with those big blue eyes that were so much like her mother's, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might tell him the truth. He could see the words forming on her lips, the desperate need to confess what was happening to her. But then her gaze flickered toward the door, as if she were afraid Celeste might be listening from the hallway. I'm okay, Daddy, she said quietly, but her voice carried the weight of someone much older than 7. Just tired from all the cleaning, from playing games with Mother. Marcus sat down beside her on the bed and gently took her small hands in his larger ones. They were rougher than they should be, with small cuts and calluses that made his anger burn even hotter. Aria, he said carefully, his voice soft but urgent. You know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all. I promise I'll always believe you, and I'll always protect you. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what threats they make, I will always be on your side. For a moment he saw hope flicker in her eyes like a candle flame in the dark. But then fear took over again, a fear so profound it broke his heart. And she nodded without saying anything more. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, Marcus whispered, kissing the top of her head and breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. And I want you to remember something very important. No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what happens, you are the most important thing in my world. Nothing and no one will ever change that. He read her 3 stories that night instead of 1, Charlotte's Web, a chapter from The Secret Garden, and a short story about a brave little princess who saved her kingdom. He stayed until she fell asleep with her hand curled trustingly in his, her breathing finally becoming deep and peaceful. Only then did he quietly make his way back downstairs, where Celeste was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and what she probably thought was a seductive smile. Is she all settled? Celeste asked, patting the couch beside her with perfectly manicured nails. She is, Marcus replied, but instead of sitting down, he remained standing near the doorway. Actually, I have some work calls to make, international clients in different time zones, you understand. I'll be in my study for a few hours. Disappointment flashed across her face, but she nodded graciously. Of course, darling. Business never sleeps, does it? Don't work too late. In his study, Marcus locked the door and immediately called his head of security, James Chen, a former FBI agent who now handled all sensitive matters for Wellington Industries. James had been with the company for 5 years and had proven himself completely trustworthy, with everything from corporate espionage attempts to stalker situations. James, I need you at the house first thing tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp, and I need you to bring your best surveillance team and all the equipment we have. Is there a security concern, sir? Has there been a threat made against you or your family? Marcus looked at the recording on his phone, his jaw clenching, as he remembered every word Celeste had said to his daughter. You could say that. Someone has been threatening my family, and I intend to make sure it never happens again. His next call was to his lawyer, David Mitchell, who had handled the Wellington family's legal affairs for over a decade and had been Sarah's close friend before her death. David, I need you to review the prenuptial agreement Celeste signed. Every word, every clause, every loophole. And I need you to start researching grounds for divorce in New York State, specifically related to child endangerment and emotional abuse. Marcus, what's going on? Is everything all right? This doesn't sound like you. Everything is about to be, Marcus replied grimly, staring at his reflection in the dark window. But first, I need to gather evidence. Lots of evidence, and I need to make sure Aria is protected throughout this process. As he hung up the phone, Marcus stared out the window at the city lights below, each one representing thousands of people living their lives, completely unaware of the battle that was about to begin in this penthouse. Tomorrow, the real war would start. Celeste thought she had been clever, manipulating and abusing his daughter while he was at work, using his grief and loneliness against him. But she had made one crucial mistake that would ultimately be her downfall. She had underestimated exactly how far a father would go to protect his child. And Marcus Wellington was about to show her that when it came to his daughter's safety, there were no limits, no boundaries, and no mercy for those who dared to harm the person he loved most in the world. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Manhattan feel alive with possibility. Marcus had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing security footage from the building's cameras and making detailed notes about everything he had witnessed. By 6 a.m., he was already dressed in his sharpest navy suit, ready for what would be the most important battle of his life. James Chen arrived precisely at 7, accompanied by 2 technicians carrying equipment cases that looked innocuous enough to be laptop bags. James was a compact man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of federal law enforcement. Despite being older than his 32-year-old boss, he had immense respect for Marcus's business acumen and leadership abilities. He had seen everything during his FBI career: corporate fraud, kidnapping cases, domestic terrorism. But the grim expression on Marcus's face told him this was personal. "Sir, I've brought everything you requested," James said quietly as they stood in Marcus's study. "Micro cameras, audio recording devices, and mobile monitoring equipment. But I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." Marcus pulled out his phone and played the recording from the previous afternoon. As James listened, his expression grew darker with each passing second. When Celeste's voice filled the room, threatening a 7-year-old child with physical punishment and emotional torture, James's jaw tightened visibly. "Jesus Christ," James muttered when the recording ended. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know, and that's what's killing me," Marcus replied, running his hands through his hair. "I've been so focused on work, so trusting, so goddamn naive. My daughter has been suffering, and I had no idea." "We're going to fix this," James said firmly, "but we need to be smart about it. If we're going to build a case that will stand up in court and protect Aria permanently, we need irrefutable evidence. Video, audio, witnesses, everything." Within an hour, the team had installed nearly invisible cameras in every common area of the house: the living room, kitchen, library, conservatory, and hallways. The devices were so small, they looked like decorative elements or barely noticeable specks on picture frames and light fixtures. Audio recording equipment was woven into the existing smart home system, and Marcus's phone was equipped with apps that would allow him to monitor everything in real time. The beauty of this system, one of the technicians explained, is that it's completely legal since it's your home and you're protecting your minor child. Everything will be automatically backed up to secure cloud servers, so even if someone tries to destroy the evidence, we'll have copies. At 8:30, Marcus kissed Arya goodbye as she left for school with Maria, who had been taking her every morning since the staff reduction. His daughter looked pale and tired, but she managed a small smile for him. Celeste, playing her role perfectly, stood beside them in an elegant robe, looking every inch the caring stepmother. "Have a wonderful day at school, sweetheart," Celeste said, kissing Arya's forehead with theatrical tenderness. "I'll be here when you get home, and maybe we can work on that art project together." Arya nodded politely, but Marcus noticed how she stepped closer to Maria and avoided making eye contact with Celeste. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." As soon as the car pulled away, Marcus announced he was leaving for the office. "I have back-to-back meetings all day, so I probably won't be home until after 6, he told Celeste, who barely looked up from her coffee and fashion magazine. "Take your time, darling. I have plenty to keep me busy here." But instead of going to his office, Marcus drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks away and opened the monitoring app on his phone. Within minutes, he was watching live footage of his own home, and what he saw made his blood boil. The moment the front door closed behind him, Celeste's demeanor changed completely. She threw her coffee cup into the sink with such force that it shattered, then stormed through the house like a woman possessed. In the living room, she grabbed Arya's few remaining toys, things that had somehow survived the previous day's cleaning, and threw them into a garbage bag. "Ungrateful little brat," she muttered to herself, her voice clearly picked up by the audio system. "Thinks she can live like a princess while I do all the work. Well, we'll see about that." Marcus watched in fascination and horror as his wife spent the next hour systematically removing every trace of childhood joy from the house. Arya's art supplies went into the trash. Her favorite stuffed animals were packed away in boxes and carried to the storage room. Even the photographs of Sarah were taken down from the mantelpiece and hidden away in closets. When Maria returned from dropping Arya at school, Celeste was ready with a performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. "Oh, Maria, I'm so glad you're back," Celeste said sweetly. "I've been thinking about redecorating some of the common areas. The house still feels so heavy with all these reminders of the past. Marcus needs to move forward, don't you think?" Maria, who had loved Sarah like a daughter, looked confused and hurt. "But Señora, these are Arya's things and the pictures of her mama." I know, Celeste said with fake sympathy. "But holding on to the past isn't healthy for anyone, especially Arya. She needs to learn to let go and embrace our new family dynamic." Marcus agrees with me completely. The lie came so smoothly that Marcus almost believed she believed it herself. But Maria's face showed she wasn't convinced. The older woman had worked for the family long enough to understand the dynamics, and she clearly sensed something was wrong. "Perhaps we should wait for Señor Marcus to discuss this," Maria suggested carefully. "Nonsense," Celeste replied, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'm the lady of the house now, Maria. These decisions are mine to make, unless you have a problem with that." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria's work visa was sponsored by the Wellington family, and everyone in the room understood the implications. The older woman nodded reluctantly and continued with her work, but Marcus could see the distress on her face. At 3:15, Marcus's phone buzzed with an alert. Arya was home from school, and the cameras showed her walking into a house that had been transformed. Her artwork was gone from the refrigerator. Her backpack hook in the entryway had been replaced with a decorative mirror. Even the family photos on the side tables had been rearranged to emphasize Marcus and Celeste, while minimizing Arya's presence. "Welcome home, darling," Celeste said with false cheer as Arya stood in the entryway, clearly confused by the changes. "I've made some improvements to our home. Don't you think it looks more sophisticated now?" Arya's eyes filled with tears as she looked around at the space that no longer felt like home. "Where are my drawings and Mama's pictures?" "Oh, those old things," Celeste said dismissively. "They were making the house look so cluttered and childish. This is a grown-up home, Arya, not a daycare center. You'll understand when you're older." "But I want them back," Arya said, her voice small but determined. "Those are my pictures, and Mama's pictures belong here. Daddy said so. Marcus felt pride surge through him at his daughter's courage, even as his heart broke for her loss. What your father says and what he means are two different things, Celeste replied coldly. He's just being polite because he doesn't want to hurt your feelings. But adults need adult spaces, and children need to learn their place. I want to call Daddy, Arya said, reaching for the phone. Absolutely not, Celeste snapped, grabbing the phone away. Your father is in important meetings making the money that pays for this house, your food, your clothes, and your school. The last thing he needs is a whining child interrupting his work because she can't handle a little redecorating. Arya's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she straightened her small shoulders in a gesture that reminded Marcus painfully of Sarah. May I please go to my room? You may go to your room after you clean up the kitchen, organize the pantry, and fold the laundry that Maria left in the basement. And Arya? Celeste's voice followed the little girl as she headed toward the kitchen. If you mention any of this to your father, you'll spend the weekend scrubbing floors. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am, Arya whispered. Marcus had seen enough. He was already in his car, driving home with a fury that made his hands shake on the steering wheel. But James's voice in his earpiece counseled patience. I know you want to confront her now, but we need more, James said, monitoring the same feeds from his mobile unit. What we have is good, but a good lawyer could argue it's just strict parenting. We need something that clearly crosses the line into abuse. How much more does my daughter have to suffer for evidence? Marcus demanded. Not much longer, I promise. But if we move too fast, Celeste could claim you're an unfit father who spies on his wife and child. We need this to be ironclad. Marcus forced himself to turn around and go back to the coffee shop, but every minute felt like an eternity as he watched his daughter perform menial labor that would exhaust an adult. By the time he finally returned home at 6:30, Arya had been working for over 3 hours straight. Daddy, she called out, running to him with relief visible on her face. Hello, little star, he said, scooping her up in his arms and holding her tightly. Over her shoulder, he could see Celeste watching from the living room, her face a mask of perfect domesticity. How was your day, sweetheart? Marcus asked Arya, but his eyes were on Celeste. It was. Arya began, then glanced at Celeste and seemed to remember the threats. It was fine, Daddy. Celeste redecorated and I helped with some chores. How thoughtful of you both, Marcus said evenly. I can't wait to hear all about it. But first he had some plans to finalize, because tomorrow Celeste was going to learn that her performance had been captured by an audience she never knew existed. The morning of reckoning dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over Manhattan like an omen. Marcus had spent another sleepless night preparing for what would either be his greatest victory or his most devastating failure. Everything depended on the next few hours, and the weight of responsibility for Arya's future pressed down on him like a physical force. At exactly 9 a.m., while Arya was safely at school, Marcus returned home with 3 people who would change the trajectory of all their lives. David Mitchell, his lawyer, Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist recommended by the family court system, and Detective Rosa Martinez from the NYPD's Special Victims Unit. Celeste was in the living room, lounging on the white leather sofa in a silk robe and reading a fashion magazine, when the group entered. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then carefully controlled concern. Marcus, darling, what's going on? She asked, rising gracefully and smoothing her hair. You didn't mention we were having company. Sit down, Celeste, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room straighten. We need to talk. Of course, she replied, but he could see the calculation behind her eyes as she assessed the situation. A lawyer, a woman with a medical bag, and someone who was clearly law enforcement. Though I'm not sure why we need such a formal setting for a conversation. David Mitchell stepped forward, his silver hair and expensive suit giving him the gravitas of a man who had practiced family law for 30 years. Mrs. Wellington, I'm David Mitchell, representing Mr. Wellington in a matter concerning the welfare of his daughter. Chen is here to conduct a preliminary assessment, and Detective Martinez is here to document any potential criminal activity. The color drained from Celeste's face, but she maintained her composure. Criminal activity? I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus, what is this about? Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the large television screen in the living room. It's about this, he said simply, and pressed play. Celeste's own voice filled the room, crystal clear and damning. Your precious daddy isn't here to protect you now. So let me explain how things really work in this house. As the recording played, Marcus watched Celeste's face transform. The mask of innocence cracked, then shattered completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. By the time they reached the part where she threatened to make Arya scrub bathrooms with her own toothbrush, Celeste's composure had completely crumbled. You were recording me? She whispered, her voice hoarse with shock and rage. In my own home? In my home, Marcus corrected, steel in his voice. Recording someone who was abusing my daughter in my home. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her notebook already filled with observations. Mrs. Wellington, what we've just heard constitutes severe emotional abuse of a minor child. The threats, the forced labor, the deliberate isolation and intimidation, these are serious crimes. Crimes? Celeste laughed, but there was hysteria in the sound. She's just a spoiled little girl who needed some discipline. Do you have any idea what real hardship looks like? I was working 3 jobs when I was barely older than she is. So this is about jealousy, Detective Martinez said, making notes. You resented a 7-year-old child for having advantages you didn't have. I resented being treated like hired help in my own marriage. Celeste snapped, her careful facade completely gone now. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of a dead woman? Every room in this house is a shrine to precious Sarah. Every conversation revolves around what Sarah would have wanted, what Sarah would have thought. I'm a living, breathing woman, and I was treated like a placeholder for a ghost. Marcus felt a flicker of recognition at her words, but it was immediately overwhelmed by rage. So you took it out on my daughter? A child who lost her mother and needed protection? Your daughter, Celeste spat, is a constant reminder that I will never be first in your life. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To know that you married me not because you loved me, but because you needed someone to take care of your responsibilities while you built your empire. The truth in her words stung, but Marcus pushed through it. Even if that were true, it doesn't justify what you did to Arya. She's an innocent child. Innocent? Celeste's voice rose to a near shriek. She manipulates you with those big blue eyes and her sweet little voice. She plays the tragic orphan perfectly, doesn't she? Well, let me tell you something about your perfect little angel. Stop, Dr. Chen interrupted firmly. Mrs. Wellington, you're exhibiting classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder, combined with what appears to be a complete lack of empathy for child welfare. Nothing you're saying justifies the systematic abuse we witnessed on that recording. Celeste turned her fury on the psychologist. Abuse? I was teaching her responsibility. I was preparing her for the real world where people don't hand you everything on a silver platter just because you're pretty and sad. By forcing her to perform adult-level manual labor while denying her food? Detective Martinez asked. By threatening physical violence against a 7-year-old? Mrs. Wellington, what you did constitutes child endangerment, emotional abuse, and potentially criminal negligence. The room fell silent except for the sound of Celeste's ragged breathing. Marcus could see her mind working frantically, trying to find an angle, a way out, some manipulation that would save her from the consequences of her actions. Marcus, she said finally, her voice dropping to the seductive whisper she had used when they first met. You can't seriously be considering destroying our marriage over some disciplinary measures. I love you. We can work through this. We can get counseling. We can... Love? Marcus interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. You call what you did to my daughter love? You systematically tortured a grieving child, Celeste. You made her afraid in her own home. You turned her safe space into a prison. She needed boundaries, Celeste protested, desperation creeping into her voice. She was running wild, treating this house like her personal playground. Someone had to teach her respect. She's 7 years old, Marcus exploded, his composure finally cracking. She lost her mother. She needed love and support, not forced labor and threats. David Mitchell cleared his throat. drawing attention back to the legal realities. Mrs. Wellington, Mr. Wellington is filing for immediate divorce on grounds of child endangerment. He's also seeking a restraining order that will require you to leave this residence immediately and maintain no contact with his daughter. You can't throw me out, Celeste said, panic replacing anger in her voice. I'm your wife. I have rights. The prenuptial agreement becomes void in cases of criminal activity against family members, David replied smoothly. It's clearly stated in Clause 17, subsection C. You'll receive nothing beyond your personal belongings. Celeste's face went white as the financial reality hit her. No mansion, no fortune, no lifestyle of luxury. Just the criminal charges and the reputation of a woman who abused a child. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous as she rose from the sofa. You think you can just discard me like trash? I know things about you, Marcus. About your business practices, about the corners you've cut, about— Mrs. Wellington, Detective Martinez interrupted. I strongly advise you to stop talking and contact a lawyer. Anything you say now could be used as evidence of additional crimes, including extortion. The fight went out of Celeste like air from a punctured balloon. She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Marcus's righteous fury, the lawyer's professional coldness, the detective's stern authority, the psychologist's clinical assessment, and seemed to finally understand that her performance was over. Fine, she whispered, but don't expect me to disappear quietly. If I'm going down, I'm taking everyone with me. As she turned to leave the room, Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Arya would be safe, sadness that it had come to this. But mostly he felt a fierce determination to rebuild the life that Celeste had tried to destroy. Celeste, he called out as she reached the doorway. She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes for one last moment. Pack quickly, he said quietly. You have 1 hour before building security escorts you out. The hope died, replaced by cold hatred, but she said nothing more. Within the hour, Celeste Hartwell Wellington was gone from their lives, leaving behind only the wreckage she had created and the long road to healing that lay ahead. 3 months later, on a crisp January afternoon, Marcus sat in the conservatory watching Arya tend to her mother's orchids. The plants had been thriving since Celeste's departure, as if they too had been suffocating under her toxic presence. His daughter hummed softly as she worked, a sound he hadn't heard in far too long. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Celeste's criminal trial for child endangerment had resulted in a conviction and 2 years of probation, along with mandatory psychological counseling. The restraining order remained in effect, ensuring she could never contact Arya or come within 1,000 feet of their home. More importantly, the family court had documented everything, creating a permanent record that would protect Arya if Celeste ever tried to re-enter their lives. But beyond the legal victories, the real transformation had happened in the small, daily moments of rebuilding trust and security. Marcus had made fundamental changes to his life, restructuring his business responsibilities so he could work from home 3 days a week, establishing new traditions that belonged only to him and Arya, and most importantly, learning to truly listen to his daughter's needs rather than assuming he knew what was best. "Daddy, look!" Arya called out, pointing to a small purple orchid that had just begun to bloom. "Mama's favorite one is flowering again." Marcus smiled, remembering how Sarah had spent hours explaining to their then 5-year-old daughter that orchids were like people. They needed the right conditions to bloom, but when they did, they created something beautiful that could last for months. The metaphor felt especially poignant now, watching Arya's own healing unfold like petals opening to the sun. "It's gorgeous, little star," he said, kneeling beside her to examine the delicate petals. "Your mama would be so proud of how well you're taking care of her garden." The conservatory had become their sanctuary, a place where they spent hours together each weekend. Marcus had installed a child-sized workstation where Arya could tend to her own plants, and she had shown a remarkable aptitude for gardening. Dr. Chen had suggested that nurturing living things could be deeply therapeutic for children who had experienced abuse, and Arya's gentle care for the plants seemed to mirror her own healing process. Arya beamed at the praise, but then her expression grew more serious. "Daddy, do you think Mama knows what happened with Celeste?" It was a question she had asked several times over the past few months, and Marcus had learned to answer it honestly, while still providing the comfort she needed. These conversations had become easier over time, as Arya processed her trauma and developed a more sophisticated understanding of what had happened to her. "I think if Mama is watching over us, she knows that we're safe now," he said gently. "And I think she's proud of how brave you were during that difficult time. But most of all, I think she's happy that we learned how to take better care of each other." Doctor? Chen had been working with Arya twice a week since Celeste's departure, helping her process the trauma and rebuild her sense of security. The progress had been remarkable. The nightmares had stopped within the first month. Her appetite had returned to normal, and most importantly, she had begun to trust that her home was truly safe again. The sessions had also helped Marcus understand his own role in what had happened, teaching him to recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse that he had missed before. "I wasn't very brave," Arya said quietly, carefully adjusting the position of a small plant. "I didn't tell you what was happening, Doctor. Chen says that was normal, but I still feel bad about it sometimes." "You were 7 years old facing an adult who threatened you," Marcus replied, his voice firm but gentle. "The fact that you survived it, that you stayed strong and kept hope alive, makes you the bravest person I know. And you know what? Even brave people get scared sometimes. That's what makes their courage so special." One of the most significant changes in their relationship had been Marcus's commitment to honest communication. Instead of trying to protect Arya from difficult topics, he had learned to discuss them in age-appropriate ways that validated her feelings and experiences. This approach had helped her develop a sophisticated emotional vocabulary and a strong sense of her own worth. The sound of footsteps on the conservatory's tile floor announced Maria's arrival. The elderly housekeeper carried a tray with hot chocolate and cookies, her face wreathed in the warm smile that had been such a comfort during the darkest days. Maria had become more than an employee. She was family, the grandmother figure that Arya needed and deserved. "Afternoon snack," Maria announced, setting the tray on the small table they had set up for their gardening sessions. "And Senor Marcus, there's someone at the front door who would like to speak with you." Marcus frowned. He had been careful about unexpected visitors since Celeste's departure, though the building's security had been significantly upgraded to prevent any unwanted intrusions. "I'm not expecting anyone. Did they give a name?" "She said her name is Jennifer Walsh, and she's from the Child Advocacy Center," Maria replied. "She has some papers for you to sign, but she said it's good news." Marcus exchanged a glance with Arya, who looked curious but not afraid. Over the past months, they had both learned that official visits weren't necessarily bad news. Sometimes they were just part of the process of making sure everything was properly documented and legally secure. Arya had also met several of the professionals involved in her case, demystifying the legal process and helping her understand that these people were there to protect her. "I'll be right back, little star," Marcus said, kissing the top of Arya's head. "Keep working on that orchid. I think it's going to be spectacular when it's fully bloomed." "Okay, Daddy, but hurry back so you can see how I'm arranging the new seedlings." In the foyer, Marcus found a professional-looking woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Jennifer Walsh carried herself with the competence of someone who had spent years working with families in crisis. But there was something especially bright in her demeanor today, as she looked at the young 32-year-old CEO who had acted so decisively to protect his daughter. "Mr. Wellington, thank you for seeing me," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm here with some very good news, actually. The court has finalized all the protective orders, and I wanted to personally deliver the documentation that officially closes this case." She handed him a thick envelope marked with the family court seal. "Everything is in order. The restraining order is permanent. The criminal conviction is on record, and most importantly, the psychological evaluation confirms that Arya is recovering exceptionally well and shows no signs of lasting trauma. In fact, Dr. Chen's report describes her resilience as remarkable." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was still carrying. For months, despite all the positive signs, He had carried a secret fear that the damage might be deeper than they could see, that Celeste's abuse might have left invisible scars that would manifest later. "So it's really over?" "Legally, yes," Jennifer replied, "but I also wanted to talk to you about something else. Your case has become somewhat of a landmark in our system, not because of the abuse itself, unfortunately, but because of how quickly and decisively a young father like yourself acted once he discovered it. At 32, you showed wisdom beyond your years in how you handled this situation. The way you documented everything, sought professional help immediately, and prioritized Arya's emotional well-being throughout the process has become a model for how these situations should be handled." She paused, pulling out a second folder. "Would you be willing to speak to other parents about recognizing the signs of domestic abuse against children? We've had several requests from parent education groups, and your story could literally save other children from what Arya went through." Marcus considered the request carefully. The idea of sharing their story publicly still felt raw and invasive, but if it could help other children, if it could prevent other families from going through what they had experienced, what would that involve exactly? "Nothing too demanding," Jennifer assured him. "Perhaps a few speaking engagements at parent education seminars, maybe an interview for our quarterly newsletter that goes out to family court professionals nationwide. We would never ask you to exploit your daughter's trauma, but your willingness to believe her and take immediate action saved her from what could have been years of escalating abuse." Marcus thought about all the parents who might be in his situation right now, successful, busy professionals who trusted the wrong person with their children's care. "I'll think about it seriously," he said honestly. "Right now my priority is making sure Arya continues to heal, but I can see how sharing our experience might help others." "Of course. And from what I've observed today, you're doing an excellent job with that." Jennifer glanced toward the conservatory, where they could hear Arya's soft humming mixed with the sound of water being poured into plant pots. "She seems like a remarkable little girl." "She is," Marcus agreed, pride evident in his voice. "She's stronger than I ever imagined possible. But more than that, she's taught me what real courage looks like. I thought I was brave because I built a successful business, but watching a 7-year-old girl rebuild her sense of safety after trauma, that's true strength." After Jennifer left, Marcus stood in the foyer for a moment holding the official documents that marked the end of their legal ordeal. But he knew that the real victory wasn't in these papers. It was in the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing from the conservatory, in the trust that had been rebuilt between them, in the knowledge that they had faced their darkest moment and emerged stronger. When he returned to the conservatory, he found Arya carefully transplanting small seedlings into new pots. Her concentration was complete, her small hands steady and sure as she worked with the delicate plants. She had arranged them in a pattern that showed real artistic sense, alternating colors and textures in a way that would create a beautiful display as they grew. "All finished with the visitor?" she asked without looking up from her work, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she carefully positioned a tiny lavender plant. "All finished," Marcus confirmed, settling into the chair beside her workstation. "Just some paperwork to make everything official. We're completely safe now, little star. No one can ever hurt you again." "Good," Arya said with satisfaction, then looked up at him with bright eyes. "I was thinking we should plant some new flowers for spring. Maybe some of those yellow ones Mama liked, the ones that smell like lemon. And I want to create a special section just for butterflies, like the puzzle I was working on that day, when everything changed." "Daffodils," Marcus supplied, remembering Sarah's excitement every spring when the first bulbs would push through the soil. "And butterfly gardens are wonderful ideas. We could plant lavender and bee balm and maybe some of those colorful zinnias that butterflies love." "Yes," Arya exclaimed, clapping her hands together with excitement. "And we could put a little bench there so we can sit and watch them. It could be our special place to remember Mama and all the good things about our family." As they worked together in the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by the thriving plants that Sarah had loved, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Not the desperate relief of crisis averted, not the exhausted satisfaction of battles won, but the simple, profound contentment of being exactly where he belonged with the person who mattered most. The past months had taught him that healing wasn't a destination but a journey, one that required daily choices to choose trust over fear, openness over protection, love over the scars that trauma could leave behind. Watching Arya work with such care and enthusiasm, seeing how she had transformed her pain into compassion for vulnerable living things, he understood that they had both been forever changed by their experience. Not damaged, but strengthened. "Daddy?" Arya's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he realized she had been watching him with concern. "You got that faraway look again. Are you thinking about sad things?" "Actually, I was thinking about happy things," Marcus said honestly. "I was thinking about how proud I am of you, and how grateful I am that we found our way back to each other. Do you think we'll be okay? Just the two of us, I mean," she asked, echoing a conversation they had had many times over the past months, each iteration showing her growing confidence in their bond. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the traumatized victim she had been 3 months ago, but the strong, resilient, hopeful little girl she had always been underneath. Her blue eyes were bright with curiosity rather than fear. Her smile was genuine rather than forced, and her question came from a place of planning for the future rather than worrying about the past. "I think we're going to be more than okay," he said, reaching over to gently squeeze her hand. "I think we're going to be extraordinary. We've learned how to take care of each other, how to listen to each other, and how to be brave when things get scary. That's a pretty amazing foundation for any family." Arya grinned, the expression transforming her entire face with joy. "I think so too," she said confidently. "And I think Mama would be happy that we figured out how to take care of each other. Dr. Chen says that sometimes difficult things happen to teach us how strong we really are." "Dr. Chen is very wise," Marcus agreed. "And so are you, little star. So very wise." As the afternoon sun slanted through the conservatory windows, casting rainbow patterns through the glass and illuminating the new growth on every plant, Marcus Wellington understood that this was what victory looked like. Not the dramatic courtroom scenes or the satisfying click of handcuffs, but this quiet moment of a father and daughter planning their garden together, secure in the knowledge that their home was truly safe and their bond was unbreakable. The future stretched ahead of them bright with possibility. Spring plantings to plan, butterfly gardens to create, school events to attend, and countless ordinary moments that would weave together into the extraordinary tapestry of a life rebuilt on love, trust, and the unshakable knowledge that they would always protect each other. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt truly hopeful about what lay ahead. And together, surrounded by the evidence of life's incredible capacity for renewal and growth, they were ready to bloom. The end. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the quiet moments when love proves stronger than fear, and family becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. Marcus and Arya's story reminds us that protecting those we love requires not just courage, but the wisdom to recognize danger and the strength to act decisively when it matters most. But perhaps most importantly, it shows us that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, and that even in our darkest moments, hope can take root and flourish into something beautiful.